The first part of the session, we will go through a standard opening that we've created for the EcoFaith Recovery cohort, and then we'll get in the program right after that. So, welcome to this gathering of the EcoFaith Recovery Metro Portland cohort. Today we invite you into a discussion of the human element, which we were able to view thanks to the generosity of Earth Vision Institute and Interfaith Power and Light. EcoFaith Recovery is a volunteer movement in which we are lifting one another up through EcoFaith's practices for awakening leadership to support our communities in taking courageous action for climate and environmental justice. Join me in engaging in the EcoFaith practices in preparation for today's program. We are an EcoFaith Recovery cohort seeking to bring healing and justice to human communities and all of creation. We seek to ground all of our work in a first practice of accessing spiritual power. Whether this is your first time participating in this gathering or you have been coming for a very long time, we are glad you are here. If you have felt overwhelmed, angry, or afraid in response to news of increasing climate disruptions and escalating environmental injustice, you are not alone. You have a place among us here. If you have found yourself burned out by one action after another done for a good cause, you are not alone. You have a place among us here. If you have been seduced into believing that you have no story that is valid, no wisdom to offer, no gifts that matter, no power to make a difference, you are not alone. You have a place among us here. If you have found that your spiritual practices are not sufficiently rooting you to weather the storms of climate disruptions and environmental injustice, you are not alone. You have a place among us here. As we trust that God can bring us out of isolation and despair into authentic communities willing to act together, our spiritual and relational resources expand. We remember that we can organize with our communities to facilitate the diverse flourishing of life in a world embodying love for all and justice for the dispossessed. To do this, we will take a moment for silent prayer, followed by the Serenity Prayer. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we cannot accept, and the wisdom to know the difference. EcoFaith's Practice 2 engages us in developing relationships. To help facilitate a relational culture, we will now introduce ourselves by our first names, the name of our community, and one human or other than human community which has been silenced or is currently experiencing harm due to climate disruptions, environmental injustice, or pandemic. After introducing yourself, please use the names on the screen to invite somebody to introduce themselves next. All right. Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourself and for sharing a little bit about yourself. We'll have opportunities later in the program to meet each other further. So EcoFaith Recovery Practice number 3 invites us to discover our stories. We consciously recognize the power of God's presence at work within our lived experience, the lives of others, and the stories of the places in which we live. In the public dimension, we discover our collective power by sharing our stories in a public arena to develop as community leaders and advance human and environmental justice. I now invite Michael Human to share his story with us in a public space. Michael.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I also want to echo what Claire was saying about Happy Earth Day. I guess my environmental story starts 50 years ago when the first Earth Day happened, and I was in college, very early in my college years. And that was a monumental event that catalyzed for me action on an issue that I had previously been concerned about, the environment and our interactions with the environment. But it gave me a perspective as to how to begin to take action, and how action, not just by myself, but in community with others, has the potential to make a bigger difference. And back in those days, this was also the time of the anti-war movement. We young people felt quite invincible and felt that we were going to change the world. Um, Sad to say, we didn't do as good a job as I'd hoped we would, and the crisis has only gotten that much more severe and acute. And we have less time for the luxury of thinking about when to take action. And for me, as part of my story, this COVID outbreak, the pandemic, has been a clear parallel. Not only is the source of the outbreak related to climate impacts in terms of humans' impact on the climate, as to how the virus transmuted from one animal species through another to human beings. But it also demonstrates clearly that when push comes to an acute shove, we actually can demonstrate the ability to change our behavior when we perceive that the need is urgent. And I would hope that coming out of this climate crisis, coming out of this viral crisis, that we can see that the climate crisis, though it's not moving in human time quite as fast, it's moving much faster in geologic time. And I'm afraid that the impacts on humans and on animals will be far greater than anything we could experience with this pandemic. And that it's incumbent upon us to recognize that, those of us who were involved in this movement, and to hopefully redouble or triple or quintuple our efforts to try to, as we come out of this, not return to normal, but to take steps to move in directions that will save this one single planet that we have, that we cherish, that we love, that we have been given to care for by the divine creator. And indeed, that is the first commandment that Jews come to learn, that Adam was told in Genesis, that this great garden has everything that you need, and you are required to take care of it. You are required to care for it. And guess what? We've kind of dropped the ball, gotten distracted by other things. But I'll stop there. The idea is that for me individually, this has been a profound part of my own story. I know that it links me to many of you. And actions have to happen have to happen on an individual basis, on a community level, and here in the United States on a state and national level if we really want to make a difference in time. So thank you. Scott, back to you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Very powerful story. Thank you for sharing that with us. We appreciate it. Just a quick heads up that one initiative that the EcoFaith Recovery Portland area cohort is working on and is our workshops for the story of Self, Us Now, to be able to share our stories about climate justice with our friends, with our family, and with people that we want to connect with, because we believe that through story and personal story that raises emotion is the most powerful way to motivate people. So keep your eyes open for workshops with EcoFaith Recovery for developing your story in the form of Self, Us Now. Thank you. Now we will take a moment to pass the virtual basket. EcoFaith Recovery is funded entirely by the contributions of individuals and faith communities. We do recognize that many people and organizations are suffering financial hardship, particularly at this time. However, if you do have the means and are wondering what to do with your stimulus check, we invite you to consider making matching donations to a frontline community and EcoFaith Recovery today. Visit www.ecofaithrecovery.org/give to make a contribution in whatever amount is right for you. And again, we encourage you to consider a frontline community as well and make a matching donation. Thank you so much. We will now get into our program of the discussion of the human element. I know that some of you just watched it, so thank you to Interfaith Power and Light for giving us permission to live stream that. This part of the program, we will be acting together. It will be done in 3 sections. We'll have 3 questions, and we've tried to frame them. And the first is a question of self. The second is a question of us, and the third is the question of now. So we'll have a little chance to work on self, us, now. And so in the first one, we'll have about 20, well, probably a little short of 20 minutes. We're running a little late to have one-to-one discussions. In the second one, we'll try to have small group discussions. And in the third one, we'll try out full group here to see if that works. So first, I'll read Practice 5, EcoFaith Recovery Practice 5, Act Together in the community dimension. Act together. Consciously engage the power of collective action in the service of God's healing and justice-seeking work for human communities and the whole of creation. In the community dimension, we nurture relational cultures, identifying common interests and public issues affecting our communities so that we are ready to act together to promote justice and healing for the whole community of creation. So we now get to our first question, part of our discussion. And so what we're going to do now is I will ask you a prompt, and we will go into a one-to-one discussion. And I guess for those of you who are already in pairs at home, it's going to be, I'm going to ask you to just pair up with somebody else on the call, because we'll set you up with one other person on the Zoom call. So just try to manage your time as best you can. And we'll give 12 minutes for the breakout sessions. And Jenny Lee, if you could prepare us for that, I will now give you your prompt. So, thinking about your story related to climate justice, what story from the film resonated with you? Why? And how does it relate to your story? And if you need it, Jenny Lee also posted it to the chat. Well, one more time. Thinking about your story, what story from the film most resonated with you? Why? And how does it relate to your story? I'll see you in 12 minutes. Sharing. What we'll do now is move into our second question. So in this with this question, Jenny Lee is going to break us into small groups of 4 people, and here's your prompt. What teachings of your faith did the film raise for you? What stories in the film made the connections? Again, what teachings of your faith did the film raise for you? What stories in the film made the connections? All right, Jenny Lee? To our third question, and this is a question of now. Michael, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure, that sounds great. Thank you. So I'm going to invite all of us to see how we react to what I'm going to read here, which was the final quote in the film, which was, he said, "We depend on the stability of the fundamental forces of the world. An imbalance in one element leads to imbalances in the other elements. Our deeds are leaving their impact on the fabric of time. The things we do that we know we shouldn't do, and the things that we do with grace, with truth, and with honest commitment are two different sides of perhaps the same coin." But he was saying that people are the only element that can choose to restore balance. So referring that to EcoFaith practice number 7, where does your community fit in with restoring a balance between humans and the earth? So where do you see your community, the faith community, and any other communities that you're part of? How do they fit with restoring that balance between people and the earth? So what I'd like to ask you to do is to first actually spend a couple of minutes thinking about that, maybe jot down some notes, because this is one, it may be that you're not doing anything right now. So what I'd like to ask you to do is to think about what are some possibilities, what are some ideas that you might be willing to raise within your community. And if your community is already doing some, you can certainly raise those as well. But so think about that, and then we will break. We're not going to break into groups. We will come back and we'll do this as a facilitated discussion. And so I'll encourage people when we come back to unmute themselves and offer their thoughts. So let's spend about 2 or 3 minutes and think about how it is that your community is or could be working on restoring the balance between people and the earth. Some time to at least come up with some nuggets of an idea or written down some thoughts. And I'll start with volunteers. So those who already have them, those who are still thinking can still be thinking, but those who are ready to offer and share some examples of either things that are going on or things that are aspirational. Claire, did I see a hand raise?
You did.
Yay.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to call on my other Catholic friends here to add to this list, but I've come up with 3 that just off the top of my head, I feel like we can practice through our faith tradition. And one is that the Catholic Church in general owns a lot of properties. We have schools affiliated with many of our churches and so forth. We can make commitments to do any and all capital improvements go through an ecological lens, right? Find out how those improvements can be supported throughout congregations as well. Like with PSEF, for instance, we have this opportunity to reach out to our congregations and see if people need upgrading in their homes and stuff for energy efficiency. Second thing is something really simple. When I was growing up, in my house, we didn't eat dairy on Wednesdays and we didn't eat meat on Fridays. And as I got older, the church wasn't focusing on that, but we could go back to no dairy Wednesdays and no meat Fridays. And that would kind of change the supply of meat and the impact of raising meat and getting it to the table. And then maybe we can pursue a more plant-based diet as a full faith tradition. And then the third thing had to do, I mean, as far as I can recall in history, there were Catholics really were quite influential in organizing in the early labor movements here in America. I think that we have that tradition, we have that knowledge, that institutional knowledge of organizing. I think we can change structures through policy by helping to organize voters to vote using the kind of guidelines for let's refocus what our priorities are right now for policy, for shaping policy.
Thank you. That's great. I appreciate that. Anybody else? Any Catholics want to chime in on, build on what on Claire's foundation? Sure, Julie first.
Yeah, I had thought the same thing about the meat, is, educating people around moving toward plant-based, not all the time, but it could be a huge impact if people had 1 or 2 days a week. So I echo what Claire said there. The other thing I think too is also to bring awareness to people of things that are going on, like the Clean Air Act right in Portland. I mean, of supporting organizations that are trying to put forth policy changes or new policy, so that we sign on behind those things and show that there is a lot of people interested in supporting, these kinds of changes that would make a big difference to our air, to our earth.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you. Bob, did you want to add anything while you're mic'd?
No.
Okay, that's fine. Catherine, you had a hand up.
Unmute. So just what kind of to build on what Julie was saying, since we're part of the same community, not just the Catholic community, but the St. Andrews community, I think I really want to figure out a way to, and I think our community is hungry for it, to be able to get people to be more, to do more of the political action things, writing letters and going to the city hall. And I think there's a lot of people that would want to do that, but we need to organize around it. And another thing, we talked to, MACG is the Metropolitan Alliance for the Common Good, which is, I know you know what it is, Michael, but it's a community organizing thing. And right before the coronavirus kind of sidelined us all, we had a meeting with Mary, who's the organizer, of maybe doing some kind of educational through a workbook or some kind of thing to get people and families to kind of look at, we're all like trying to make our lifestyle more, our own personal lifestyle more ecological, like eating less meat and not driving everywhere and taking public transportation more, but maybe doing something to address some of those questions and come up with ideas in a more formal way in smaller groups. So small groups getting together and figuring out how, the effects of, how to make less trash and how to recycle better. Anyway, something like that.
So a quick editorial for you, for both Julie and Bob and Catherine and Ann. MACG would welcome you joining the Climate Action Research Action Team. Our meetings are at St. Andrews, so you could join Claire and I and some others who are already on that. But thank you, those are great suggestions. Are there others who would like to share some of their thoughts and ideas or actions? Bruce, looks like you're coming forward, and then we'll go to Alice and then to Peter. So,
there you go. I think that we are in a very unique place with still going through the pandemic and all the effects, but to not see it as much as something really awful that has happened to us, but to find the opportunity that it presents and what we've learned as a result of sequestering in place, and how that affected our air quality and all these other things, and to say let's not forget what some of the good points and good aspects of what we've learned as a result of this, because my concern is that as soon as we begin to move toward going back to normal, we're going to get into the whole gaslighting phase, and it's like, let's get back to the way it was. We got to restore our economy, everything's good, and let's pretend it sort of never happened. And we don't walk away from it having learned any lessons from it, because there is so much for us to learn in this process, and many, many good things, even in spite of, the downside of it. There's still some good, we can do it. We know that.
Thank you, Bruce, for that. I would really underscore what you said, that our faith communities are probably some of the best places where we could make those sorts of things happen. So that's a great suggestion. Alice, let's turn to you. Unmute yourself and your turn to share. And then Peter, you're next. Alice, did you want to speak? Because you're not unmuted yet. Getting there. There you go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
As I've met with people over the years in groups, so for example, the UCC conference committee, what I'm finding is there are individuals who are leading or have been leading that have more, and so they give other people ideas. There's another group of faith, the Presbyterian Church downtown, I've had a chance to meet with, and so they were one time they planted gardens, or a garden, I think in the Hillsdale area for a nearby apartment. It's been too long. So those things have happened on an individual basis. We also have a young teen, well, actually, I think he started with 9 or 10 years old, that was aware, became very aware that this was his future. And he's met with the governor, is spoken in front of the state legislature over the last several years. He's also been to Washington, D.C. And so it's slowly happening. It's kind of like cracking ice, but it's slowly starting to happen. I just don't know how, and I appreciated, Bruce, did you say it? That because of what's being shown to us right now, if everything gets proven, because we're also skeptical, but the photographs of even what's happened over a few weeks of air clearing, things like that, if we can get those posted and proven and those reports out, then that's good news. And maybe we'll start to encourage us all, or more of us, to go ahead and.
Thank you. Yeah, those great suggestions. I appreciate that. Peter, I want to turn to you, and then I see that Scott has his hand raised. Not his hand, but a blue box hand.
So as with many of you, I was thinking about how our community of St. Michael's could advocate in the context of the pandemic. And I was on a meeting with Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon people today, and learned, not surprisingly, that the Northeast Emergency Food Program has set, 2 records in a matter of a couple of days in the number of clients served due to the immediate demand for food, because people are food insecure. And literally the daily numbers have quadrupled and quintupled in response to people losing work and not being able to access their unemployment benefits quickly enough, or that those benefits aren't adequate to be a safety net. And I think what the pandemic has revealed is we're in a moment where we're really being tested in how our society responds to what Jesus called the least of these. And are we feeding the hungry? Are we housing the homeless? Are we visiting those in prison? And we're seeing in all these areas the weaknesses of our culture in when a pandemic hits. So prisoners are getting unduly hit with coronavirus in cases, and they're extremely vulnerable to that. The poor and the houseless are made even more insecure in the context of the coronavirus. So I see this as sort of a chance for reimagining of our culture and our society, building from the bottom up and really embracing and trying to bring about those Matthew concepts for those of us who are New Testament folk.
Thank you. That's very, very powerful. And I think it's something that speaks to not just going back to the way it used to be, but learning from this, as Bruce was saying, and move in new directions. Scott, your turn, and then we'll open it up for 1 or 2 more.
I just want to echo what Peter said and Bruce said in terms of, to me, this is a moment, an opportunity to us. Yes, I need to fully acknowledge the suffering that's going on in both in terms of disease and death and just economic suffering that's happening. And then the question becomes, what do we want when we come out of this? And I just see advocating for a Green New Deal is so important. The Green New Deal is a vision that can provide jobs and provide hope and create the social safety net that we need to take care of people in situations like this. So I encourage people to look at the Green New Deal, to look at something called the Green Stimulus. And if you just want some resources about the Green New Deal, go through the 350 PDX Green New Deal page, and we've put a whole bunch of resources there you can follow up on. So thanks, Michael.
Thank you very, very much. We've got time for probably 1 more comment, and I would like to see if there's somebody who hasn't spoken who would like to say something. Bob, you're raising your hand. Go for it.
I'd like to kind of add to the conversation around the learnings from this situation that we're in right now, and make sure that we're really holistically looking at what these learnings are. We've seen most recently protests by people who want to have the businesses opened, and we're seeing we're going to continue to see pressure on that. And why is that happening? Okay, because you look at it and you say that doesn't make any sense, but it does make sense if you're looking at the small business owners who are losing their livelihoods. Okay, if you watch in the coming weeks what will happen in the state of Texas when the price of oil continues to stay low. This is an example where, I think in a lot of the environmental movement, we'd say, okay, we need to cut the amount of fossil fuel that's being used. We need to cut the amount of coal that's being used. Well, in the human element, we saw what happens when coal stops being used. And now we're going to see what happens in Texas when people stop buying oil. And if those are the consequences of some of the environmental actions that we're advocating for, we better be prepared to have the programs in place to be able to lift those folks up who are going to lose their livelihoods. Okay, and we're also finding that when the government comes to backstop that, and it's got to float all the way to the federal government because the states can't do that on their own, it is going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars. And one of the things that we're going to have to learn from this is that when the safety net has to be shoved into place because it wasn't there in advance, sooner or later, we're going to have to pay for it economically. And so those are the other side, to me, they're the other side of the coin of some of these learnings that we ought better factor into the equation, or else it isn't going to work.
So I really appreciate that. And I want to say that it's really an and, it's not necessarily the other side, but it's the same side, because we recognize that there's this pressure right now on people who've lost their jobs and small business owners who can't stay open. And the idea is, how can we, and the government's got to shell out money, how can we shell out the money in a way that leads us to the new economy, as opposed to just supporting the old way of doing things? And I don't think we're talking about the small businesses, mom and pop shops in town, as much as we are those fossil fuel jobs in the bigger industries. And this is an opportunity to use the government stimulus dollars to help transition people to the new green economy, to more sustainable energy sources. As well as, I want to tie back to something that Claire Burt had talked about here in Portland. So it's not just theoretical, but right here in Portland, we have the Portland Clean Energy Benefits Fund, or PCEF, and there's money there to train people and put them to work to make homes energy efficient, to make our faith institutions energy efficient, and to put solar on them, and to put gardens in our communities. So there are opportunities, and I would invite us all to, who are in Portland. I know some of our faith institutions are in Beaverton or in Washington County or Clackamas, but those that are in the city of Portland, there is some real advantages that we can take advantage of. But I'm getting us over time, so I should turn it back to Scott. But first I want to say thank you all for participating in this process, and I hope it's been useful to you. I've learned a lot from all of you, and I really appreciate it. But Scott, bring us home.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for facilitating that discussion. And I, like you, Michael, I thank everyone who participated in that. I took notes on all of the great ideas you came up with, and would love to continue this discussion, but I'm sure some of us want to get some dinner as well. So I'd say if people want to continue the discussion, let's be in touch. Yeah, I guess I'll just have to leave it at that. If you could be in touch with us at EcoFaith Recovery, I'd love to schedule a follow-up discussion or meet with some of you one-on-one. So let's just try to stay in touch after this discussion, because I think we've just started.
Let me also say that we are inviting each of you to take this back to your own institutions and have similar discussions, maybe around this film or just around the topic. The film is available for viewing through the 26th, through Sunday. So if you can get the word out in your institution and invite your members to view this by going and getting the link like you did, then you could schedule a discussion at St. Andrews or at any of your other facilities, at St. Michael's, you know, and then let's get back together.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we found that it's available fairly inexpensively on Amazon Prime and some other sources. So yeah, you'll have to pay a small token, but I think the movie will be available outside of this window as well. All right. So now in the EcoFaith model, we want to be able to reflect on what we've done, and in order to learn from our interactions together. So I'll reflect on practice number 6, which is reflect on our actions, and invite us to do a little reflection. So Practice number 6 is consciously reflect upon and evaluate our actions and the ways we use power in order to learn and grow into mature and courageous leaders. In the community dimension, we create a culture of reflection and evaluation within our communities, regularly assessing power dynamics and learning from our gatherings and actions in order to mature as leaders and communities. So would anyone like to share just an item on, what do you feel went well here, and or what could be improved upon? Any sharing on Robin?
I want to say a special thank you to you, Scott, and to Michael. Your planning and your management of the time for us, pre-planning on how the breakout groups would work and having Jenny prepared to facilitate those, just really for me made it really flow. And I got to hear from individuals in a group and the full group. And so you were a wonderful model for me of how that can be planned well in advance and executed well in the moment. So thank you for that. I have to lead a 7 p.m. Zoom conversation for St. Andrew Lutheran. So in just 2 minutes, I'll be stepping off.
Thank you, Robin. I'll share an improvement that I'd like to see. Personally, I could have done a better job sharing leadership, and I just didn't reach out before the meeting to share leadership on this. So I think a shared leadership model would create a more powerful session. So that's one of my reflections. All right, just in the interest of time, if those of people who need to reflect, we'll just offer that please share, you feel free to share any reflections regarding this gathering via email at office@ecofaithrecovery.org as well, and we'll gladly receive and collect those after this meeting. As a reminder that the goals of practice 7, restore balance, I'll read practice number 7 in the community dimension. Restore balance. Consciously realign our lives with the sacred and natural rhythms of life expressed through the whole of God's creation. In the community dimension, we incorporate Sabbath practices into the culture of our communities, honoring the limits of both human and earth capacity and the earth's capacity and our need for restoration. As we go forth from this gathering to work for climate and environmental justice, may we always remember that God is with us and that we are called to be faithful regardless of whether we are successful. I welcome you to type an intention into the chat box at this time, or just make it silently to yourself as to what you'd like to do for the remainder. Pick one thing that you'd like to do for the remainder of Earth Week. You can type it in the chat box or just note it to yourself. And now, in closing, I welcome you to join me in a moment of silence and our serenity prayer. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we cannot accept, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.